Madam Speaker, let's start at the beginning. Bill C2 was tabled as what I would call a panacea. It was meant to be a cure-all, a reaction piece, something to contain a number of liberal promises or not so many promises, requests, bureaucratic lingo, things like that. Now, I can still remember, even though I wasn't here, how the Liberals spoke about omnibus bills and how bad they were. The big, bad Conservatives passing these big, bad omnibus bills, and they would never, ever pass omnibus bills. And yet, here we are. One of many omnibus bills comes to us in the form of Bill C2 with a number of problems. Bill C2, if memory serves, enacts or alters 15 pieces of legislation. It was about 120 pages long, if memory serves. And the Liberals told us, you know, you should just pass this. Just trust us. And given some of the rhetoric in the House today, it's somewhat comical that they would use this type of language. Just pass this. Just trust us. As a member of His Majesty's loyal opposition, our job is to listen to Canadians and to closely scrutinize government legislation. In a 120-page bill, there were problems. And I'm going to highlight one of those problems, and I really hope the member for Winnipeg is listening closely on this one, because it was the warrantless search. Now, he has spoken to this House ad nauseum about the fact that Canada Post cannot open up mail without a warrant, no less than 5, 6 times. They have a number of lawyers on the Liberal side. We have a number of lawyers here. But the legislation actually speaks really clearly. So I'm going to actually read the legislation into the record, just so that we're really clear on this, and then speak about what we've been through with a number of bureaucrats here. So this is what the legislation says at Section 41 in Part 4. The corporation may open any mail if it has reasonable grounds to suspect that. And then the reasonable suspicion part, it relates to regulations. So if any regulation is suspected to be breached, Canada Post can open your mail. Now, I understand the intent of the legislation. If I'm understanding it clearly, the intent of the legislation is to cover up a gap in that mail cannot be open with warrants. That's my understanding. In other words, we want to make it so that anybody shipping 499 grams or less can be subject to a warranted search, as in a search in which a judge authorizes it. Okay? But let's look at this, because the member, I admire his zeal for sticking with this position, a position I thought was untenable. So let's go through that again. The corporation may open any mail. So any mail. That includes letters, parcels, anything. I think we're all on solid ground there. We all know what any mail means. Okay? And may open. So it's not compulsory. The government doesn't have to open mail. It is permissive. The government can open any mail if it has reasonable grounds to suspect. So Canada Post, the corporation, it says. So this is very interesting. The corporation legally has, air quote, personhood, but the corporation is made up of people. Those people generally are not going to be peace officers. In fact, I don't know if Canada Post has any peace officers under its employ. So it doesn't even require a peace officer. So theoretically, somebody in the mailroom with no training, we hear all about RCMP training and things like that, somebody with no training can open up mail, they may, not shall, if they have reasonable grounds to suspect. Now, the member from Winnipeg has told us so many times, you need a warrant. So I went to a briefing with top officials from his government. And guess what they told me, Madam Speaker? You don't need a warrant based on these provisions. Imagine that. The words are so clear that you don't need a warrant. So let's just go through it one more time for clarity. The corporation may open any mail if it has reasonable grounds to suspect that. It doesn't say the corporation may apply for a warrant. It doesn't say the corporation shall apply for a warrant. It says they may open any mail. And here's the real kicker. Okay, reasonable grounds. Now, I haven't practiced law for about 4 years, but my recollection is that a search warrant is issued by a judge when there are reasonable grounds to believe, based on oath or affirmation, that an offense has been committed, that there is evidence of that offense, and that the place to be searched will yield evidence of the offense. So you have to have those three characteristics with reasonable grounds to believe. Okay, so let's go back to the language here. Again, the plain language. The corporation may open mail if it has reasonable grounds to suspect. Wait a minute. That's not reasonable grounds to believe as you need in a warrant. And yet the Liberals have repeatedly stood up in this place and said, you Conservatives are just full of conspiracy theories, you need to get a warrant, when it says right in here, Madam Speaker, you don't need to get a warrant. Now, I know the member from Winnipeg is very active in questions and comments, and God forbid that any member in this House would misspeak, so I really look forward to him addressing this issue in questions and comments. In fact, I'll even ask, perhaps a page can run him this, because it says right in there, he can tell us whether he still believes in this or acknowledges, perhaps, that Conservatives were correct on this issue. And that leads me to C2 generally, Madam Speaker. C2 was a mess. The government went very far. Now, we can all acknowledge that border security is an issue, right? But this went very far, and we heard about it from Canadians. So the Liberals have said, you know, we need this, we need it done. How dare you stand in the way of border security and things like that? But we as Conservatives played our role as opposition, and we did so very clearly. We took issue, and if you will notice, the matters with which we took issue are not matters in Bill C12. I take great pride in that, because that is what an opposition does. An opposition scrutinizes, an opposition considers, and an opposition opposes when it is appropriate and where it is appropriate to oppose. So lo and behold, Part 4, which speaks about the inspection of mail, it's no longer in Bill C12. It remains languishing in C2. It's by no coincidence that that occurred, because we as Conservatives consistently raised the plain language, which I think I'll quote again, the corporation may open any mail if it has reasonable grounds to suspect that. And then it goes on to the regulations. What are the other things that are missing here? Conservatives raised substantial questions about privacy concerns. Parts 14, 15, what are colloquially called lawful access. People will have said, you know about the Bajkovich decision, and I know about the Bajkovich decision very well. I think I was still practicing law when it came out. This was a decision that said there's a reasonable expectation of privacy in an IP address. Okay? As Parliament, we have to remedy this. And we've actually seen the Liberals, when they want to remedy a decision that is untenable for this House, they have no problem doing it quickly. And I will note that they have failed to do it on bail, because there have been 3 or 4 decisions on bail in which they actually codified, which means they took the language from the decision and put it in legislation. They didn't push back on it. But under Section 33.1, the defense of extreme intoxication, it was struck down. We had legislation before this House, Madam Speaker, within weeks of that happening. They didn't want a law on the books they didn't want a lack of law that said extreme intoxication is an excuse for a general intent offense. As in, you don't have the ability to commit the offense legally. I believe it goes to the actus reus of the offense, but it's been a while. But in any event, the Liberals responded with legislation very quickly. Bail, we don't really care so much about that. But now, we're tough on crime, they say. This is after Ministers of Justice Varani and Lametti stood in this House, stood just over there, and told us there is no problem with bail. They literally stood there and said there is no problem with bail. So the Liberals have no problem responding when it is consistent with their agenda. Here in C12, what they won't acknowledge is that it was robust opposition that led to elements that should be debated in C12, or in C2, forming C12, and the other very questionable issues in C2 remaining in C2. It also begs the question, what's going to happen in Bill C2? I mean, perhaps we can have another debate on Bill C2 and the member from Winnipeg can stand up and speak about warrantless searches of mail. They could also discuss cash transactions and how much money should be permitted and whether we should actually be telling Canadians how much cash they can or cannot use. Madam Speaker, I just want to pause here. I want to acknowledge somebody here who has done tremendous work when it comes to democracy and participating in democracy. That person is named Dawson McKay. He's a Crown prosecutor in British Columbia. I admire his passion for the rule of law and what's right, and I want to thank him for his contributions to democracy. He's somebody with a deep conscience, a deep desire to do what is right, and I do thank him for his work. I would also like to thank somebody else, another prosecutor, Alex Wheel. He actually works out of the Kamloops Crown Counsel office in Kamloops, Thompson-Nicola. Somebody who I've had the pleasure of, I actually met him when he was in law school, when he was just thinking about becoming a prosecutor, and we spoke. I taught his now wife in the Faculty of Business back then, and very proud to call Alex a friend. I'm so grateful for his work in contributing to democracy. I'm also proud of his work in contributing to public safety, and I want to recognize that formally in the House of Commons, Madam Speaker. So we've spoken about the mail provisions. We've spoken about C2 generally and how we got here. Now let's focus on C12. What's in it and what's not in it? I know my colleague from Selkirk Interlake Eastman is going to be giving a speech today. I'm sure that he will give it with characteristic zeal and great detail, as he is so often known for in this House.
Although that's a compliment.
What's not in Bill C12, Madam Speaker? There's no mandatory prison time for fentanyl traffickers. One thing that we heard, I believe we heard it from the Secretary of State for Crime. She said, Liberals are tough on crime. That actually was said in this House. Like, really? Really? Tough on crime? Now the Liberals are going to come out, apparently, we haven't seen the legislation, but we're being told we should support it. We haven't even seen the legislation yet, but we're being told we should support it. I would think that the House would support a bill on intimate partner violence, for instance, but that remains to be seen. And I'm told it has good stuff in it. It actually speaks about sex offenses and no longer having house arrest. You know, for people who commit sex offenses. Madam Speaker, I've probably raised this issue 15 times in this House, and the Liberals have literally openly mocked our views when it comes to justice. They've mocked them when we've raised this. I actually raised this issue with the Minister of Justice at one time. Oh, don't worry. When somebody commits a serious crime, they will get serious time. Well, what happened to that mentality of trusting the judges? The Liberals told us, you should just trust the judges. They're appointed. Now, wait a minute. No more house arrest for sex offenses. We don't trust the judges anymore. We're tough on crime. Something they mocked us for. The whiplash that I'm getting. I'm worried I'm going to wake up with a stiff neck tomorrow based on the whiplash I'm getting from this government now. Tough on crime, Madam Speaker. What else don't we have in here? No mandatory prison time for gangsters who use guns to commit crimes. You can actually get house arrest for a drive-by shooting. And what's worse, Madam Speaker, that's not the court's doing. That is the Liberals doing. Bill C5. Minister Lametti, as he then was, said, well, I don't know that somebody has to go to jail for popping off a couple shots into a barn after having a couple of pops. They're drive-by shootings. Discharge with intent, okay? Intending to discharge a gun. You do that in a car, it's called a drive-by shooting. You do it otherwise, it's called a shooting with intent. There used to be a 4-year mandatory minimum, which was constitutionally upheld in a case called Oud, I might add, for the Liberals who say that we as Conservatives, just everything has always been struck down. So it went from a 4-year sentence to house arrest potential. And now the Liberals are tough on crime, but not tough enough to put this into an omnibus bill to keep us all safe. The Liberals have created what I would characterize and what I would call a porous border, Madam Speaker. And that porous border is allowing firearms to get in like never before. And what should we be doing? Because people will say, well, you know what, Frank, denunciation and deterrence, they don't work. They are our sentencing principles in the criminal code from time immemorial, but they'll say they don't work. But I'm starting to have serious questions about the fact that people can repeatedly commit crimes and they believe they're untouchable. And I've seen this. I've seen it happen on so many occasions just in my employment before I was blessed to be present and in this House. Madam Speaker, when you let somebody operate with impunity when it comes to the criminal law, you will invariably have an outcome that they repeat the behavior because they have learned that there will be no consequences from it. And Bill C12 is silent on that. I hope that the Liberals will give credit where credit is due as to how C12 came here. We will scrutinize this legislation and we'll go from there. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess if it was the will of the Conservatives, they tried to give this impression that whether you're a letter carrier for Canada Post or you're a mail organizer in Canada Post, that they're going to start opening up the letters of Canadians. I find it amazing. I'm going to sidestep that particular issue because, Madam Speaker, I think there's a more serious issue that we had over the last number of days. When the member's leader, the leader of the Conservative Party, made very serious statements against the RCMP at the highest level. And I think that the member would agree with me that the RCMP as an institution is recognized as around the world as a first-class institution. And when his leader starts providing the type of comments that he has put on the record, false comments I would suggest, at the end of the day he is doing displaying a great deal of disrespect to the RCMP. I'm wondering if the critic or the shadow minister would agree that the leader of the Conservative Party crossed the line when he says that the RCMP are despicable, Madam Speaker. I think Canadians need to hear what he has to say about the comments that his leader has actually made. Does he support those comments?
Member for Kamloops Thompson Nicola.
Well, what I find very despicable, Madam Speaker, is how the Liberals an hour ago refused to support my private member's bill in the form of C225, and I hope that they reconsider that. On the mail issue, I really hope he does reconsider this. I mean, I'm just going to read it again one more time into the record in hopes that he will concede this. You know, we have had our back and forth in this House many, many times, and you know, perhaps some of them have been draws, if you will, when it comes to debates, okay? But this one here, I just won't concede it, Madam Speaker. Let's just go one more time. The corporation may open any mail if it has reasonable grounds to suspect that. And see, he actually made my argument for me, saying, well, what's a mail carrier going to be able to do this? Well, obviously Canada Post has policy, but the legislation as written would actually allow that if that person was part of the corporation. So I commend him for helping me with my argument. Thank you.
The honourable member for La Pointe-à-L'Île. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to know what my colleague thinks about the union for the CBSA agents. Thinks we have to increase the number of officers from 2,000 to 3,000 to really ensure better control at the borders. And does he also think, what does he think about the fact that the Coast Guard has the mandate to control and surveil, but not to intervene? They're not integrated into national defense.
Thompson Nicola.
Madam Speaker, I thank you. Through you, I say, with respect to my colleague, I've heard him very often. My French is not the best, but I would say, il a une belle voix.
He has a nice voice.
Hearing his voice, because he speaks with such power in this House, so I really appreciate that. Madam Speaker, I can actually say to my colleague, I've had several meetings with the union leader from CBSA. I will be meeting with him very shortly. This is a concern. The border officers issue is quite vexing to me, because the minister actually said, they said an announcement that was re-announced and then re-announced, and I think maybe re-announced twice more, about 1,000 officers. But then just the other day, the minister caught himself, personnel. Well, what does that mean? So I stand with the union in saying that our border is porous. We do need more people. I actually had opportunity over the summer to visit the border and see this. Morale is low. They want change. They need change. And these are people who are working on the front lines to do their best. We need to support them to the best degree possible. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just want to congratulate my colleague, the Shadow Minister for Public Safety, for his great intervention today. And just wanted to follow up on some of the comments man made. Like in C2, which this C12 has taken the parts that we kind of agree with and moved them over. But C2 is still sitting on the order paper. And C2 still has in there, as he was mentioning, giving the power to Canada Post employees to do search and seizure, which is in complete violation of our charter rights. We know that in C2 they also wanted to take cash and make it illegal to make deposits over $10,000. Last time I looked on the back of it, any currency that we have here in Canada, $20 bills, $10 bills, $5 bills, it said by Government of Canada. We're talking about legal tender here, guaranteed by the government itself and the Bank of Canada, and yet they want to make cash illegal. And so I just wanted to ask him if he believes that the Liberals are going to turn away from C2 and let that flawed policies that they have still in C2, and whether or not we should be making some suggestions about them, or whether you see it in C12, whether or not they're going to empower CBSA officers to be able to police the entire border, not just ports of entry.
Member for Kamloops Thompson Nicola.
Wow, where to start, Madam Speaker? My colleague proved his intellectual fortitude one more time here, Madam Speaker, with that brilliant intervention, if I might say. The issue of enforcement with ports of entry, my colleague raises a very important point here. It's something that I don't believe gets enough coverage here in this House. And that is if somebody commits an offense, despite the fact that border officers with the CBSA are peace officers, which grants them specific powers under the criminal code, their mandate does not permit them beyond the port of entry. So let's say somebody had a kilogram of cocaine and it was dropped outside of the port of entry, even if it was in sight. The CBSA could not actually go and get that. Now, this is something that has been stated to the government time after time after time. If they want to make meaningful changes, I think that's something that we really should be debating in this House. When it comes to his comments on C2, I can't agree more. C2 remains on the order paper, and we need to scrutinize it. I wonder if the Liberals will pull back from it. They've obviously showed some willingness to do that, given that C12 is now before us. Thank you.
The honourable member for Salaberry, Soulage Huntington. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm really pleased to hear my colleague, my Conservative colleague, support the Bloc's proposal at the end of the day, which is to optimize the work of our border officers by allowing them to leave their position to intercept either migrants or merchandise that are beyond the port. CBSA officers are trained for defense. They are armed. They have everything they need to be able to better cooperate with the RCMP, which is often far away from the port of entry, particularly in rural regions like mine. Does my colleague agree to mention this during our study on border security so that it can be included in a recommendation from the committee report from the Public Safety and National Security Committee?
Through you, Madam Speaker, I say merci pour votre.
Thank you for your question.
Good experience working with my Bloc colleague, who is the critic for public safety, and I hope that we can maintain a good relationship in working together to create the best possible legislation. Madam Speaker, we shouldn't shy away from asking the hard questions in this place, and sometimes they will be contentious. Sometimes the answers will be very easy. Sometimes they will be difficult. I know that somebody had an idea in mind when they restricted CBSA's border mandate or their mandate to you cannot go beyond this, but we shouldn't shy away from discussing these things. So in answer to my colleague's question, I would be happy to include this in a study. I think this is something that we should be debating. We shouldn't shy away from these. These are sometimes very tough questions. They're often difficult questions to ask because we have to consider the RCMP, who currently have the mandate. How far are they from the borders? There are going to be borders where they might be 15 or 20 minutes away in a response time. That's unacceptable, in my view. So I think that the time has come for us to have a robust discussion. My colleague pointed out that the CBSA members are armed. That's actually something that was done under the Harper government. They are well trained, and I thank them for all they do to keep us safe. They don't always have the tools to do it. They don't always have the resources to do it. But let's give credit where credit is due. These people put their lives on the line for us every single day. And we, as Conservatives, we as Canadians, ought to be grateful. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.